So this first video is for topic 1 from the Structures and Forces unit called Structures. The essential question we're going to have answered by the end is, can you recognize and classify structural forms and some of the materials used in their construction? So the key terms you're going to see in this video include structures, aesthetics, function, materials, properties, solid or mass structure, frame structure, and shell structure. First thing I'm going to talk about is structures themselves, and a few things that we need to know about structures is that they can come in many shapes and many sizes, but they always serve a purpose or function. So when we talk about the shape or the size, we're talking about what it looks like and its aesthetics. And when we talk about function or its job, there are two kinds of categories of structures. You can have a manufactured structure, meaning it's made by humans, or you can have a natural structure where it exists in nature. We are going to look at the variety of materials that can be made, from steel and concrete to brick, plastic, wood, rocks, soil. And then when we look at structures, not only can we put them into manufactured or natural, but then we can look at the types. So is it a solid or a mass structure? Is it a frame structure, or is it a shell structure? So materials are important to understand that if you're going to build a structure, you want to think about what kind of materials you're using, because you want them to match what the purpose of the structure is or the function of the structure. So when you're looking at different materials and their properties, so what are they strong, or are they flexible? Can they be stretched? Can they bend? You want to make sure that the properties match what you're doing with the structure. So let's dig into the three types of structures. So we've got solid and mass, meaning that it's a solid piece or a solid combination of pieces of really strong material. Some of the advantages of a solid structure is it can be held in its place by its own weight. And there's very small amounts of material that you can lose that has little effect on the stability of it. And a disadvantage is it requires a lot of materials because it's very heavy and it's solid all the way through, which can be very costly. So you can see I've got iceberg, we have a rock wall, and we have the pyramids all as solid examples of solid structures. Frame structures are skeletons of strong materials. So they can be filled or they can be covered with other materials, but the frame is what supports the overall structure. Most of the inside should be an empty space. The advantages are it uses less material and it's relatively inexpensive. A disadvantage is that if the material is joined and they have joints, it often can be where the weaknesses occur. So you can see we have a suspension bridge, a greenhouse, and the Eiffel Tower as examples of frame structures. Shell structures are thin and they're carefully shaped. Their outer layer of material is there to provide strength. So you can see that we've got an example of an igloo, the Epcot Center in Disney World maybe, and then you've got the Sydney Opera House down here. The advantage here is that you need very little material. It's hollow inside, and they're very good at being a container or being there for aesthetics, meaning that they're there to look good. And a disadvantage is that any kind of small weakness or imperfection can cause the structure to fail. So a good example of a shell structure in nature is an egg. And you think about when the egg cracks, it then becomes very weak. It can be really difficult to also find materials that shape very nicely into shell structures. You can have combinations. So that's when you have two different types of structures put together. So a shell and a frame, and that would be the greenhouse. Very common in modern architecture. You could also have those. So the Saddle Dome is another example of that. So at the end of this, you should be able to recognize and classify the types of structures. So remembering a mass or a solid structure, frame, and a skeleton, or frame is like a skeleton, and a shell. And you should be able to identify some of the materials. So is it wood? Is it rock? Is it brick? And why maybe I picked that kind of structure.